Hi, welcome to our channel of IGNOU audiobooks, Indira Gandhi National Open University, School of Continuing Education, SOCE. Certificate Programs, Certificate Program in Rural Development, CRD, MRD-102 Rural Development Program, Block-1 Poverty Alleviation Programs, a Retrospect, Unit-1 Poverty Alleviation Programs, a Retrospect. 1.0 Objectives. After studying this unit, you should be able to define the concept of rural development and poverty. Explain the need for poverty alleviation. Critically examine the strategies adopted by the government for poverty alleviation from time to time. List out the steps taken by the government to alleviate poverty through various programs, and explain what impact the various programs have had on the poor in the rural areas. 1.1 Introduction. In the post-independence era, India has achieved commendable success on many fronts. In the case of agriculture, being importers at one time, we are now not only net exporters but also one of the largest donors of food in the world. In the field of science and technology, we are on the frontiers of many areas like space, communication and information technology. In spite of all this, our country has the largest number of the poor in the world, and therefore rural development and poverty alleviation continues to be one of the major focus areas of the National Development Policy. Rural development in India is identified largely with the poverty alleviation policies. Perhaps no country in the world has invested so much time and resources on poverty alleviation and achieved so little as India. Over the 25-year period, 1973-74 to 1999-2000, the poverty ratio, i.e., the percentage of the poor in the total population, has been halved from 55% to 27%. Though it is not a mean achievement given the magnitude and complexity of the problem, but the fact remains that our performance weighs the performance of many other countries, especially China and East and Southeast Asian countries, has been far from satisfactory to say the least. 1.2 Need for development interventions. It is obvious that the problem of poverty in India is a major challenge and it needs priority in our development policy, if we want to improve the nation and also to compete with the developed nations. It can be seen from tables 1 and 2 that poverty in rural and urban areas is more or less similar, but in terms of numbers, the poor in rural India are nearly 3 times the urban population. About 3/4 of the total population of the country is rural, and therefore majority of the poor are in the villages. It is why Gandhi ji repeatedly said that India lives in villages and the development of the nation cannot be achieved without the development of the villages. The real fruits of independence and democracy, in fact, cannot be enjoyed by the people unless they are freed from the clutches of poverty. Initially, it was thought that when the process of development started, the trickle-down effect would take care of the problem of poverty. This process did achieve results in countries where industries and the service sector developed faster and overtook the agriculture-based economies, but in countries like India, it did not work due to various reasons. Some of the important ones are as follows. 1. India continues to be an agrarian economy, which contributes less than 1/4 of the GDP, but employs more than 70% of the rural workforce. 2. Nearly 80% of the farmers have small and marginal holdings, less than 2 hectares, and most of them practice subsistence agriculture. Besides, a large number of landless people depend on agricultural labor. The majority of these people belong to socially weaker sections, who have little access to the various means of developing agriculture. 3. A high rate of population growth and a low level of literacy are other important factors which have adversely affected the developmental process. 4. Slow pace of development in industrial and service sectors and inability of the non-farm sectors to absorb excess labor from the farm sector is also one of the important causes of poverty in India. 5. Moreover, if there was any trickle-down effect, it remained confined to the urban areas only. In the given situation, it was necessary for the government to initiate development of rural areas through various types of interventions to suit different types of regions, different social and economic classes of people with varying economic base as well as those without any economic assets. Thus, the Government of India introduced a number of programs as part of its planned strategy to develop rural India and alleviate poverty. 1.3 Poverty in India. Now let us look into the poverty situation in India. The most commonly used method to measure poverty is the head count method, which only describes the number of poor people below a certain level of income, expenditure. It does not indicate the severity of poverty, and therefore some efforts have been made to measure not only the extent of poverty but also its intensity. The measurement of poverty in India is based on the consumption and expenditure data collected through National Sample Survey Organization, NSSO. Based on NSSO data, the population below the poverty line at different time points as estimated by the Planning Commission is provided in Table 1.1. The methodology used by the Planning Commission, however, has some defects. Accordingly, they constituted an expert group to provide a more realistic estimate of poverty in the country. The poverty estimates by the expert group are provided in Table 1.2. It is clear that the poverty estimates by the expert group are higher than those estimated by the Planning Commission. According to the estimates of the expert group, which are accepted by the government, the overall poverty has declined from 54.9% in 1973-74 to 26.1% by 2000, indicating an average of about 1% decline per year. The rural poverty has declined from 56.4% in 1973-74 to 27.1% in 2000. The rate of reduction of poverty in rural areas is slightly more than that in urban areas, as can be seen from the figures. In fact, urban poverty is also a reflection of rural poverty, as large numbers of the rural poor migrate to urban areas for better wages and thus add to urban poverty. Table 1.1, Poverty in India. Look at the screen. Table 1.2, Poverty in India is measured by the expert group. Look at the screen. 1.4 Approaches to poverty alleviation in India. We will now discuss as to how the problem of poverty was being tackled in the country and what approaches were adopted to achieve the goals of rural development. Employment generation and poverty alleviation are dependent on one another, as increase in employment is a determinant for the reduction in poverty. Employment does not mean engaging in work only, but it also implies gainful income or a remuneration for the work which is able to provide the minimum basic needs of the people for them to live a minimum acceptable standard of life. 1.4.1 Poverty Alleviation Programs. The rural poor can be divided into three main categories: I, those with land; E, those with skills; and E, those without land and skills. During the initial stages of rural development through the Community Development Program, CDP, a holistic approach to develop agriculture, infrastructure and basic facilities in the villages was adopted. It was assumed that as the process of development progresses, it would take care of each and every category of the rural population. During the 1960s, when the CDP was gaining momentum, the country was faced with food crisis and, therefore, the entire rural development effort was directed to the development of agriculture. As a result, we achieved green revolution towards the end of that decade and the country gained self-sufficiency in food production. While this event was most welcome, it was not without side effects. The farmers with small and marginal holdings did not gain from the green revolution and they remained poor. The benefits of agricultural development did not percolate to the large numbers of agricultural laborers either. Introduction of modern farm technology and use of modern factory-made equipment rendered a large proportion of rural artisans jobless. The overall situation was that a visible disparity between the rich and the poor emerged. There were many reasons for this situation. Some of the important ones are as follows. 1. Modern farming being cost-intensive, the small and the marginal farmers could not adopt modern farm technologies due to the lack of credit facilities and thus remained poor. 2. The Green Revolution was confined to agroclimatically rich areas, while the other regions remained backward. 3. Intensive farming did increase the absorption of labor, but it was proportionately too low as compared to the supply of manpower in the labor market due to population explosion. 4. There was no appreciable growth in the non-farm sector to absorb surplus labor from the farm sector. 5. There was no attempt for upgrading the skills of artisans for them to stay in the job market. This resulted in vast unemployment among them. In order to counter these maladies of the development process, a series of special rural development programs as corrective measures were introduced during the early 70s. The most important among them, which was directly focused on the small and marginal farmers, agricultural laborers and rural artisans, was Small Farmers Development Agency, SFDA, introduced in 1973-74. In 1974-75, Marginal Farmers and Agriculture Laborers, MFAL, agency program was also introduced to take specific care of the marginal farmers, the rural artisans and the agriculture laborers. The MFAL, which was similar to SFDA, was merged with SFDA in 1976. Though SFDA was supposed to take care of all categories of the rural poor, it mainly concentrated on those with land assets and neglected laborers, causing serious problems of unemployment among them. Unemployment was severe among the assetless and the skill-less poor in the villages. To provide relief to the rural poor, who mainly depended on daily wages, a crash employment program was introduced in 1974-75 in selected districts, followed by another wage employment program called Pilot Intensive Rural Employment Program, PIREP. It was introduced during 1975-76 in the blocks which had chronic unemployment problem. These programs emerged with two distinct characteristics. A. Programs for self-employment, mainly focused on those with assets and/or skills. And B. Programs for wage employment targeting those who did not have any source of income other than their physical labor. During 1978-79, SFDA and the beneficiary-oriented element of all other programs were merged into one, and a new program for self-employment, called Integrated Rural Development Program, IRDP, was introduced in 2000 blocks, initially with a provision to bring 300 blocks under the program every year. Similarly, all programs aimed at wage employment were merged and brought together under the Food for Work program. In 1980, IRDP was expanded to all the blocks in the country, and simultaneously the Food for Work program was also reorganized as the National Rural Employment Program, NREP, and extended to all the blocks of the country. In order to upgrade the skills of the rural artisans and also develop skills among those without any skill, a sub-program of IRDP called Training of Rural Youth for Self-Employment, TRYSEM, was introduced in 1981. Though the provision of covering 40% of women under IRDP and TRYSEM was already there, a new program called Development of Women and Children in Rural Areas, DWCRA, was introduced on a pilot basis in 50 selected districts, again as a sub-program of IRDP. Towards the end of the 80s, DWCRA covered all the districts of the country. The main purpose of DWCRA was to organize the poor women into groups and help them in self-employment by providing them income-generating activities. In the case of wage employment, it was realized that NREP was not able to provide the minimum guaranteed wage employment to the rural laborers, and therefore a program fully financed by the Ministry of Rural Development, Government of India, called Rural Labour Employment Guarantee Program, RLEGP, was launched in 1983 with universal coverage. The year 1987 was the worst drought year of the century, and the small and the marginal farmers suffered most. For relieving them from the vagaries of the monsoon, a program called Jeevan Dhara, later named Million Well Scheme, MWS, with 100% subsidy to the small and the marginal farmers, belonging to scheduled castes and scheduled tribes mainly, was introduced. The NREP and RLEGP, with similar objectives, caused overlapping, and therefore the Ministry of Rural Development, Government of India, decided to merge these two into one program in 1989. It was named Jawahar Rozgar Yojana, JRY, and the village panchayats were assigned the task to implement it. Again, to supplement the wage employment efforts, a new program called Employment Assurance Scheme, ACAS, was introduced in about 1700 blocks with chronic unemployment problems during 1992-93. Later ACAS was extended to cover all the blocks of the country during 1996-97. During 1991-92, another program for self-employment with specific focus on rural artisans was introduced. It was called Supply of Improved Toolkit to Rural Artisans, CITRA. In 1994-95, a minor irrigation program called Ganga Kalyan Yojana, GKY, was introduced for those small and marginal farmers who were not eligible under MWS. While MWS was a fully subsidized program, GKY was only partly subsidized. A detailed list of programs and the events related to rural development in India is provided in Annexure I. Towards the end of 90s there were 6 programs for self-employment and 2 programs of wage employment being implemented by the Ministry of Rural Development. See the boxes. Since the target group for all the self-employment programs was the same in the procedure of selection of beneficiaries was also more or less the same, the multiplicity of the programs created a number of problems in their execution. The more troublesome ones were as follows. 1. Due to multiplicity, many influential persons were able to get the benefit of more than one program at the cost of many poor families. 2. Since considerable amount of subsidy was involved, in some cases 100% subsidy, MWS and etc., it encouraged the involvement of middlemen and local leaders and even senior politicians in the selection of beneficiaries, resulting in considerable number of non-eligible families taking the benefits of these programs. 3. Lack of proper planning was another cause of low performance. 4. Poor recovery of loans made banks reluctant to advance loans, causing significant setback to these programs. 5. Marketing of the produce by the beneficiaries was also a major problem which led to the failure of a large number of income-generating schemes taken up by the beneficiaries. Keeping the above factors in mind, the Ministry of Rural Development, Government of India, decided to restructure the self-employment and wage employment programs. Accordingly, all the 6 self-employment programs, namely IRDP, TRYSEM, DWCRA, CITRA, MWS and GKY were merged into a single program. Box 1. Programs for self-employment, IRDP and its sub-programs. 1. IRDP, Integrated Rural Development Program. 2. TRYSEM, Training of Rural Youth for Self-Employment. 3. DWCRA, Development of Women and Children in Rural Areas. 4. MWS, Million Wealth Scheme. 5. CITRA, Supply of Improved Toolkit for Rural Artisans. 6. Ganga Kalyan Yojana. Box 2. Wage Employment Programs. 1. JRY, Jawahar Rojgar Yojana. 2. ACAS, Employment Assurance Scheme. Since the target group for all the self-employment programs was the same in the procedure of selection of beneficiaries was also more or less the same, the multiplicity of the programs created a number of problems in their execution. The more troublesome ones were as follows. 1. Due to multiplicity, many influential persons were able to get the benefit of more than one program at the cost of many poor families. 2. Since considerable amount of subsidy was involved, in some cases 100% subsidy, MWS and CITRA, it encouraged the involvement of middlemen on local leaders and even senior politicians in the selection of beneficiaries, resulting in considerable number of non-eligible families taking the benefits of these programs. 3. Lack of proper planning was another cause of low performance. 4. Poor recovery of loans made banks reluctant to advance loans, causing significant setback to these programs. 5. Marketing of the produce by the beneficiaries was also a major problem which led to the failure of a large number of income-generating schemes taken up by the beneficiaries. Keeping the above factors in mind, the Ministry of Rural Development, Government of India, decided to restructure the self-employment and wage employment programs. Accordingly, all the 6 self-employment programs, namely IRDP, TRYSEM, DWCRA, CITRA, MWS and GKY were merged into a single program called Swarnjayanti Gram Swarozgar Yojana, SGSY, made operative on 1 April, 1999. Also, JRY was redesigned and named Jawahar Gramin Rozgar Yojana, JGSY, on April, 1999. In 2001, however, JGSY and ACAS were also merged into a single program called Sampurna Gramin Rojgar Yojana, SGRY. 1.4.2 Impact of Poverty Alleviation Programs. In the foregoing details we have discussed the various programs for rural development and poverty alleviation. Here, let us examine the impact of these programs on the poverty reduction. Based on the 55th round of the NSSO estimates, the percentage of people below the poverty line in 1999-2000 has, for the first time, fallen below the 30% mark.
The rural poverty ratio was 27.1, the urban 23.6, and the overall poverty ratio for the country was 26.1 by 1999-2000. The rate of decline in poverty was highest during 1993-94 and 1999-2000, as it fell from 36.0% to 26.1%, recording an average annual rate of decline to a little above 1.6%, see Table 2. In the field of human development also, there has been favorable trends of improvement. Indicators like health status reflecting in crude birth rate, crude death rate, infant mortality rate, IMR, and life expectancy reveal encouraging trends. The literacy status, particularly the female literacy, of the rural people too shows an upward trend. Even in the states like Rajasthan, where gender discrimination is high, the literacy levels show upward trends. The process of reduction in poverty, however, has not been uniform all over the country. Some states have done exceptionally well, while a few states have not recorded much change in their poverty status. Table 1.3 below provides state-wise percentage of the population below the poverty line. It is clear from the table that Table 1.3, state-wise poverty ratios, percent of population below the poverty line. During 1999-2000. Look at the screen. The states and the union territories with poverty ratios below 10 are Goa, Haryana, Himachal Pradesh, Jammu and Kashmir, Punjab, Chandigarh, Daman and Diu and Delhi. The states between 10 to 20% interval are Andhra Pradesh, Gujarat, Kerala, Mizoram, Rajasthan, DNN, Haveli and Lakshadweep. The states with poverty ratio between 20 to 30 are Karnataka, Maharashtra, Manipur, Tamil Nadu, West Bengal, ANN Islands and Pondicherry. The remaining states, which include most of the northeastern states, Orissa, Bihar, Uttar Pradesh and Madhya Pradesh, continue to show a poverty ratio above 30%, Orissa, 47.15%, and Bihar, 42.60%, being the poorest states in the country. Some of the reasons for not achieving the desired impact of these programs are as follows. 1. Implementation of the programs was not effective. 2. Lack of area-specific and integrated planning which was essential to sustain the benefits of the poverty alleviation programs. 3. Most of the income-generating schemes provided to the poor families did not match with their capability and hence the beneficiaries were not able to sustain them. 4. Lack of supporting infrastructure including marketing facilities. 5. Inadequate investment on the beneficiary projects. 6. At some places there was poor participation of the people in these programs. 7. Corrupt practices in identifying, selecting and funding the beneficiaries have also had adverse effect on the programs. 1.5 Summary. In this unit we have learnt about the definition, types and the related aspects of poverty in India. Further, a detailed account of policies and the programs of rural development introduced by the Government of India in the post-independence period has also been provided. India has followed basically two approaches to overcome the problem of poverty: A. Reliance on trickle-down or spread effect of rapid growth, and B. Direct public intervention. During the first 2 decades, the 1950s and the 1960s, of the post-independence period, it was noticed that there was no visible impact of trickle-down effect in rural areas. Realizing this, a series of special programs were introduced during the 1970s onwards focusing on different regions, as well as specific socio-economic groups as direct intervention to alleviate poverty. Accordingly, to meet the challenges of rural poverty, various programs for rural development and poverty alleviation were introduced in the country from time to time. Some programs, particularly those aimed at area and infrastructure development, were focused to enhance the capital base in rural areas. The overall impact of all these initiatives has already been discussed in the preceding sections. This section will therefore help you in understanding the rationale and the need for the programs introduced in the country. Thank you. Subscribe to our channel for more updates, and we will see you with the next chapter.